Hello, you are tuned in to Eric Jose on Doctor Who on YouTube. Here we will cover pretty much anything Doctor Who, spin-off shows from Doctor Who itself, old Doctor Who, anything goes, anything at all, people. I will talk about all kinds of Doctor Who here with you. So if you have any comments, questions, anything that you just want to just talk about or, ask me a question about, because I do have an extensive history with Doctor Who. I've seen pretty much everything that's available. So, like I said, I encourage feedback and comments and questions, so please do so. And I just wanted to introduce you to my friend here, Minnie Handles, who will be in my videos with me. Alright, so here we are with this episode. In this episode, there is essentially, we see the rift open up, a tentacle comes out at the beginning of the episode and kind of just starts, meandering down a roadway and heading towards wherever. So, and it's long, it's spindly, all that. So that's how this episode starts out with, and it progresses from that point. What we end up basically discovering is it's going and knocking on people's windows and whatever, and then it cuts to the scene with the girl that plays Chloe Webber in the Doctor Who Olympic episode. I forget her name in this, but it cuts to her in her room and she's talking to her dad. Now the odd thing about that is if you had watched Coach with the Dragon Tattoo, there was points where Ram continuously was calling her and they were video chatting on their computer, and Ram was kind of opening up to her because she wasn't asking him any questions about his girlfriend that had died in the first episode. She wasn't asking him about it. She wasn't trying to tell him to open up about it. And so because she wasn't doing that, he was actually talking to her. And over the course of their conversations, we find out the reason why she wasn't pressing him about it is because she had a similar thing with her dad when her dad had a stroke, and she didn't want to talk about it until she was ready to talk about it. So she understands that with him, and because she understood that, he ends up kind of opening up with her a little bit. Not a lot, but a little. And in the course of them talking, we find out about her dad, like I said, and all that. So at the beginning of this episode, after we see these tentacles going around knocking on windows and things, we see in her room that her dad's there, and she's talking to him. And eventually she because she doesn't believe he's there, she's like, "You can't be here, you died." And he's like, "Well, yeah, I know, but I'm here because," and he starts giving some mumbo jumbo about how his soul was collected by this, whatever, da 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 da. Anyways, but there's a tentacle connected to his back. It's, connected to this thing. So that came out of the rift. So the tentacles that were knocking on windows. Well, it goes a step further. Once they knock, then they come in, they create the image of somebody that you love or whatever, and they try to convince you to become one with them or whatever, and they'll release you from your pain and da 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 da. So she ends up leaving him there. She goes over to her mom's room, says, "I'm going for a walk" or whatever, but it turns out her mom is all like entwined in the tentacles or whatever. So, but she was under the covers, so she didn't even notice. The girl didn't even notice that her mom was, under attack essentially. Okay, so eventually now, as this is going on, Ram and April end up talking to each other because Ram is trying to video chat with Tanya, the smart girl, the girl that played Chloe in the Olympic episode. He's trying to video chat with her, but she's not responding. Well, that's because she just left and is dealing with this fact that her dad is in her room, and so she's not by her computer. So he ends up video chatting with April. And she's the girl that was like all into decorating for the party or whatever, and she's thin. Anyways, you guys, if you've seen it, you'll know who I'm talking about. And so they meet up and they're talking about what's going on, and they see these. So they're seeing all these tentacles around after they meet up, and they're walking through the streets, and instead of like running to get like the other people, like Charlie and find Tanya and do all that and figure out what's going on. No, they just like stroll through the streets like nothing's going on. It's really odd. Really odd. And then in the midst of this, with all these tentacles everywhere, all around them, so they sit down at this bus bench and like they're like just like nothing's going on. Tentacles all around them. They seen one person that reached out and touched one of the people that was at the end of one of the vines, and they saw that person get like dragged away. They like have seen dead bodies, what looks like dead rotting bodies or almost zombie like looking bodies on sidewalks. And then they just sit down at this bus bench to sit there and discuss philosophy. in life and love or whatever, kind of, but basically having like a philosophical conversation at this little bus bench with what I just described all around. Like, there's no sense of urgency. And then she like totally just like snogs Ram. April does. And I mean, totally just kisses him right there. And it's like, do we not see what's going on here? Anyway, so that's it. Finally, they kiss. Okay, fine. The story can now move on. So they move towards Tanya's house. Or her apartment, whatever. So they see a bunch of tentacles at the building where she lives. And so they start surmising that she must have been the target or whatever of it, right? Okay. And we get in that from the conversation between Tanya, because she comes back in and she's talking to her dad again. And what the dad is saying is that, yeah, we feed on souls. It's a mutually beneficial thing and blah, 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 blah. And he's trying to convince her. So then that's when she starts talking about some old jazz tunes, or like some old folk music tunes or type thing, and how there was a common theme about things coming to your window or whatever. And Ram, of course, is like, oh my God, I've heard more about folk music in the last hour than I have heard ever in my whole life or whatever. And she's like, that's not why I'm saying it. I'm saying it's a common theme in these, that something will come to your window and it will, it will tap at your window and come in and try to, sometimes it's just delivering a message, but most of the time it's trying to drag you down with it. And so then that's when Ram gets what she's saying, that she wasn't just talking about music for no reason again. So he's like, oh, okay. So he sees that there might have been a correlation. So they go in, they try to help Tanya. Tanya ends up in the end that Tanya kind of had her own idea, and she ends up, like turning it around on this thing that's acting like her dad. Turns out the whole time she had been hiding her anger and resentment towards her father from this thing. And because she was hiding that and only focusing on her feelings of sorrow and that she misses her dad, that's what this thing was picking up on. But the moment that she reached out to it, she shifted her emotional state. And when she did that, what he ended up connecting to in her was all of her anger and frustration and all of that about her dad passing. And it wasn't what he expected. And it totally, it's a bitter pill for him, and he doesn't like it, and it kind of weakens him. But just as he's realizing that it didn't weaken him enough, that he was actually still okay, that's just at that point in time when Miss Quill is coming driving down the road with a big double-decker bus, which, you're only going to get in England, but tall enough so that it would hit this line that, the tentacle that was connected to him going into Tanya's window. And so she hits it with the double-decker bus and pulls him out the window, and he blah, blah, blah. Anyways, all the tentacles then go and retract back into the rift. Episode over. So it was kind of a cool episode, but I just seriously had issues with, the way that they did the love interest. I mean, it number one was out of place at the time that they were kind of forcing it into the episode. It was just kind of out of place. But not only that, Ram in the previous episode has been completely whining him, didn't want to talk about the fact that his girlfriend had been killed because he was still mourning and still messed up about it. And then here we are in this episode, and that's pretty much already dissipating. Even though he saw her in his room before he left his house, he saw that girl in his room, showing that he had that much of a connection to her. And yet by the end of this episode, he's been snogged by April, or kissed by April, and now it's like, it's almost like that girl doesn't even exist. And it's just like, okay, what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to just write this off that they're teenagers? And that he would have forgotten about that pain he was feeling that quickly? I mean, I don't. Anyways, it's just a little bit kind of, I don't know. It didn't come off right. It felt awkward to watch because it just didn't. I get it that they were trying to build that love interest now because his old girlfriend's gone and they wanted to go ahead and bring Ram and April together. But the way that they shoehorned it into this episode, I thought was a bad idea. Okay, so that wraps it up for Night Visiting, the name of this episode. And if you haven't already, please hit subscribe.